There are people who walk through life like unfinished sentences, heard, but never truly understood. They laugh when required, they speak softly, not because they lack words, but because the world has never learned to listen to the language they carry. They are the ones who have spent their entire lives feeling misunderstood, not because they are dramatic, not because they crave attention, but because something inside them has always existed at a depth most people never look into. The psychology behind people who feel misunderstood their entire life often roots itself in emotional incongruence, a state where their internal reality never fully matches the interpretations of those around them. Psychologists often describe this experience as chronic misattunement, the lifelong sensation that their emotional frequency is slightly out of sync with the world. Maybe you felt this too, that strange loneliness that exists even when surrounded by people. Maybe you've done that thing where you rehearse your sentences in your mind, only to keep them unspoken because you know they'll be misunderstood anyway. Maybe you've carried thoughts that feel too heavy for casual conversations, too deep for small talk, too layered for people who only listen with their ears and not their heart. Maybe you've learned to smile to avoid explaining, to stay quiet, to avoid being judged. You've been told you're too sensitive, too quiet, too complicated, but they never saw the thousand unspoken meanings living behind your eyes. They never noticed how your silence wasn't emptiness, it was a language of its own. A language you learned because your inner world has always been bigger than what your outer world could hold. You carry conversations inside your mind that no one else has ever heard. People who feel misunderstood their entire life show patterns that are almost invisible unless you know where to look. They often pause before speaking, not out of hesitation, but calculation. They scan for misunderstandings before their words even leave their mouth. They write long messages, and then delete half of them. They reread their own messages before sending them. They replay conversations in their mind trying to pinpoint the moment where their meaning got twisted. They apologize more than they should, not because they did something wrong, but because they're used to being blamed for being misread. They rarely talk about their deeper emotions, not because they don't want to, but because historically their feelings either confused people or made them uncomfortable. They prefer meaningful conversations with one person instead of loud crowds. They prefer writing over speaking. They prefer silence over explaining themselves yet again. The psychology behind people who feel misunderstood their entire life begins long before adulthood. It often starts in childhood, inside homes where emotional accuracy was a luxury, not a norm. For many, it came from parents who only understood expressions they recognized, but dismissed the emotions they didn't. Maybe their emotions were too complex for the adults around them. Maybe they were the child who asked, why, too many times, who noticed too much, who felt too deeply for parents who were too tired, too distracted, or too wounded to understand. This creates what psychologists call invalidation learning. A child learns to mute their real emotional language because the world mirrors it inaccurately. Psychologists explain that people who feel misunderstood for most of their lives often operate with hyperactivated emotional filters. Their minds learned early to scan for rejection, misinterpretation, or emotional distortion, and this habit becomes a permanent part of their cognitive wiring. Attachment researchers call this anxious avoidant protection, where the person wants to be understood deeply, but simultaneously fears the emotional cost of another misunderstanding. Their nervous system remembers the past too clearly. Neuroscientists describe this as a form of amygdala sensitivity, where the emotional centers of the brain stay alert, overreading tone, expression, and subtle cues, not out of paranoia, but out of childhood training. The brain developed a habit: find the misunderstanding before it finds you. Psychologists call it anxious avoidant protection. You call it being tired of explaining yourself to people who never listened the first time. They call it amygdala sensitivity. You call it the emotional flinch you feel when someone misunderstands your silence. They call it hyperactivated emotional filters. You call it the exhausting instinct to rehearse every sentence in your mind before you speak it aloud. They call it misattuned parenting. You call it growing up in a home where your emotions were too complex for the adults who raised you. They call it internalized invalidation. You call it the quiet ache of doubting your own feelings because someone once told you they didn't make sense. They call it cognitive distortion patterns, you call it the constant fear that maybe it really is you, that maybe you're hard to understand when all you ever wanted was someone who tried. They call it emotional inhibition, you call it staying silent because self-expression has rarely been safe for you. They call it dysregulated self-worth, you call it wondering why your voice feels foreign even to yourself sometimes. This is the emotional reality. Your mind learned science, your heart learned the wounds, and both have been negotiating ever since. People who feel misunderstood their entire life often live inside small, quiet moments that no one else notices. They sit in conversations where everyone laughs at something light, yet their mind is still caught on an unspoken meaning from 20 minutes ago. They walk into a room and instantly sense the emotional climate, who's tense, who's distant, who's pretending to be okay without anyone telling them a word. They overthink a message they sent 2 hours ago, not because they're insecure, but because they want their words to reflect their truth, and the possibility of being misunderstood makes their chest feel tight. They sometimes rehearse what they're about to say before speaking, not out of fear, but because their thoughts hold layers others may not follow easily. They tell a story with depth, and the other person responds with something surface level. This emotional mismatch hits them quietly, like a soft ache behind the ribs. They pour their heart into explaining a feeling, and someone replies, "You're thinking too much." That sentence alone can push them deeper into their internal shell. They connect more with books, music, and late-night thoughts than with people who speak without listening. They feel a strange sadness when someone interrupts them, not because they wanted attention, but because it took courage to share something that wasn't easy to express. They've learned to say, "It's fine," even when it isn't, because the effort to explain feels heavier than the pain itself. To be misunderstood is not just a wound, it is a language, a consciousness, a way of walking through the world with more perception than it knows what to do with. People who feel misunderstood their whole life possess something rare, an inner world that refuses to shrink. What others call overthinking is actually the mind refusing to accept shallow answers. What others call too emotional is the heart protecting its capacity to feel truthfully. What others call difficult to understand is simply someone who refuses to dilute themselves for the comfort of others. To feel misunderstood means you think in echoes, not statements. You feel in currents, not puddles. You see in metaphors, not outlines. It means your mind hears the emotional subtext beneath people's sentences, the part they don't say aloud. This is not a flaw, this is emotional intelligence in its most raw form. They live in the tension between who they are internally, and who they're forced to be externally. They hold dual truths, the desire to be seen, and the instinct to stay hidden. The need for connection, and the fear of translation loss. The craving for emotional intimacy, and the exhaustion of explaining themselves. They are not shallow beings trying to appear deep. They are deep beings trying to survive in a shallow culture. If you felt misunderstood most of your life, healing doesn't begin with trying to make others understand you, it begins with understanding yourself. Your inner child still remembers the moments when your feelings were dismissed. That child learned to speak softly, to hide complexity, to keep emotions folded neatly like unread letters. Sometimes the healing begins simply by acknowledging, "I wasn't wrong, I wasn't dramatic, I wasn't too much, I was just unwitnessed." Inner child work isn't about rewriting your past, it's about giving your younger self the validation they never received. Letting them know their inner world was real, even if no one around them understood it. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches something subtle but powerful. Just because the world misunderstood your thoughts doesn't mean your thoughts were incorrect. It teaches you to replace the old belief, "No one will understand me," with a more honest one, "Not everyone is capable of understanding depth, and that's okay." Mindfulness helps misunderstood people reconnect with their own emotional rhythm. To sit with a feeling without rushing to explain it. To breathe in silence without feeling guilty for being quiet. To exist without justification. Therapeutic growth begins when you stop trying to be understood by everyone and start creating space for people who speak your emotional language. Not all hearts are fluent in the same dialect. Some will hear your silence from a distance, a few will hear it as tenderness. Some will hear your depth as complexity, a few will hear it as truth. Some will hear your hesitation as insecurity, a few will hear it as emotional precision. Healing isn't about convincing the world to understand you, it's about recognizing that your inner world is worth understanding, even if only by you at first. You don't need to simplify yourself, you need to surround yourself with people who don't require simplification. Your depth deserves listeners who aren't afraid of deep water, your emotions deserve mirrors that reflect more than the surface, your truth deserves a home where it doesn't need translation. There is something profoundly spiritual about people who feel misunderstood their entire life. Not religious, not traditional, but spiritual in the way their soul processes existence. They don't just move through the world, they absorb it. They don't just experience emotions, they interpret them. They don't just live, they perceive. Their inner world is not a place, it's a dimension. A quiet, untamed landscape where thoughts become echoes, emotions become colors, and memories become entire universes they revisit in silence. People who feel misunderstood often carry what philosophers call an introspective consciousness. A type of awareness that sees not only the outer world but the undercurrent beneath it. The motives, the wounds, the contradictions, the hidden meanings. This depth naturally creates distance, not because they want to be distant, but because the world is loud, and their soul listens in frequencies others don't notice. There is a sacred loneliness in them, like the soft ache of a violin string that vibrates even after the music stops. They are the kind of people who feel attached to places they've never been, connected to emotions they've never spoken, and nostalgic for versions of themselves they haven't met yet. Their soul often feels older than their body, in the way they process life like someone who has lived more than one human experience. They don't fear solitude, they understand it. Because solitude has always been the one place where their depth doesn't feel out of place. Life for them isn't a sequence of events, it's a search for meaning. A quiet, private pilgrimage toward inner truth. Here is the spiritual paradox they live with: the deeper your soul becomes, the fewer people can follow you. It's not arrogance, it's resonance. A tuning fork only vibrates when another matches its frequency. Misunderstood people spend years trying to lower their frequency just to connect, not realizing that their true connections will only come when they stop dimming their inner wavelength. Their soul was never meant for crowded understanding, it was meant for the rare, gentle, truthful kind that happens maybe once or twice in a lifetime. Healing for people who feel misunderstood is not a dramatic breakthrough, it's a quiet return. A return to their own voice after years of translating themselves for others. A return to their own emotions after years of filtering them through fear of misinterpretation. A return to their own truth after years of shrinking to fit conversations that never matched their depth. Here are gentle, subtle practices, not instructions, not tasks, just soft invitations for the heart. Giving yourself permission to pause isn't withdrawal, pausing is letting your emotional dust settle so you can breathe again. Let your inner child speak in small, safe ways. Take your younger self out of the shadows for a moment. Whisper to them, "I understand you now." Some feelings don't want clarity, they want presence.